Okay, hi everyone. This is the third lecture of Monetary and Financial Economics B2. Today's topic is stabilization policies and with a fixed exchange rate, which is continued from the second lecture. Okay, we will cover managed floating and sterilized intervention, the foreign exchange market equilibrium, and the imperfect asset substitutability, the reserve currencies in the world monetary system, and the gold standard. Okay, let's move on to the first topic, managed floating and sterilized intervention. So when a central bank carries out a sterilized foreign exchange intervention, its transactions leave the monetary supply unchanged. So the money supply unchanged when the central bank conducts a sterilized foreign exchange intervention. So under the previous model, so please check the second lecture. So without an accompanying change in the money supply, the central bank's intervention will not affect the domestic interest rate and exchange rate. So therefore, it's hard to analyze the sterilized intervention by using a formal framework, the past framework, okay? So let's consider the fiscal policy. So fiscal policy under the fixed exchange rate. So output expands more than under the floating exchange rate. So this is the first lecture or B1's content, okay? So fiscal policy under the fixed exchange rate, output expands more than under the floating exchange rate. So the central bank buys foreign assets and expands the home money supply in the floating exchange rate, so which causes inflation. So the central bank may try to avoid this inflation by sterilizing the increase in the money supply. So then the central bank sells domestic assets, but to keep the exchange rate fixed, the central bank must buy more foreign assets. So therefore, sterilization is a self-defeating policy. So now I introduce new word, perfect asset substitutability. So the assumption in the equilibrium, the expected returns on domestic and foreign currency bonds are the same, is called perfect asset substitutability. In contrast, imperfect asset substitutability is a situation that an asset's expected return can differ in equilibrium. So one factor causes an imperfect asset substitutability is risk. So under the perfect asset substitutability, participants in the foreign exchange market care only about the expected rate of return. So market participants only care about expected rates of return. So since these rates of return are determined by monetary policy, sterilized interventions do not affect the exchange rate. So recall that intervention affects the money supply, which causes a change in the expected rate of returns and the exchange rate. So under the imperfect asset substitutability, both risk and return matter. So the central bank's action that alters the riskiness of domestic currency assets can move the exchange rate even when the money supply does not change. So risk matters. So now risk matters, so the exchange rate can change even when the money supply does not change. So then, how can the sterilized intervention alter the riskiness of domestic currency assets? So this is a question, today's key question. So to analyze that, how the sterilized intervention alter the riskiness of domestic currency assets. So to analyze this question, we will introduce a new framework in this section. So foreign exchange market equilibrium and the imperfect asset substitutability. So in this section, we will introduce a new model. So that is model under imperfect substitutabilities. So when domestic and foreign currency bonds are perfect substitutes, then the foreign exchange market is in equilibrium only if the uncovered interest parity condition holds this. Oh. So this is covered interest parity condition. So the foreign exchange market is in equilibrium only if this UIP condition holds. But when they are imperfect substitutes, the UIP condition does not hold in general. So this is the case for the perfect substitutability. And when they are imperfect substitutes, then the UIP, this condition doesn't hold in general. So let's introduce risk premium law, so which reflects the difference between the riskiness of domestic and foreign bonds. So when we introduce risk premium, the UIP condition can be rewritten as like this. So here is law. So law is risk premium. So then domestic interest rate is equal to the foreign interest rate plus expected rate of depreciation here and risk premium. So now risk premium matters the domestic interest rate. Now I define aggregate demand for domestic currency bonds depends on the risk premium law like this. So this is aggregate demand for domestic currency bonds. Okay, now I define the supply of domestic bonds. So the supply of domestic bonds available for the private sector is like this. The supply of domestic bonds equal to the total domestic bonds minus the portion held by the central bank. So this is the domestic bond supply. Then market clearing condition on the domestic bond market is like this. The bond supply equal to the bond demand. So the bond demand equal to the bond supply, and this is a market clearing condition of domestic bond market. And then this is this graph showing the equilibrium. Okay, horizontal axis is the quantity of domestic bonds, and the vertical axis is risk premium on domestic bonds, low. So equilibrium is first here, point 1. Here, the supply of domestic bonds equal to B minus A1, and the risk premium is low 1 here. So this is a new initial equilibrium, point 1. Then the central bank sells domestic assets from A1 to A2. Then the domestic supply increases from this to this. Then, so this is the new equilibrium. Risk premium also increases, and also, again, so by reflecting the central bank selling by central bank, the domestic supply also increases. And here is new equilibrium point 2. So important thing is that even if the central bank purchases foreign assets and sells domestic assets, the money supply is constant. So doesn't change. So as a result of the domestic asset sale, the central bank's domestic assets are lower. The stock of domestic assets that the market holds increases. So risk premium increases, then the downward slope shifts to the right, and then domestic currency depreciates to E2. So this graph shows the exchange rate change according to the monetary supply change. Okay, again, as normal, the horizontal axis is domestic interest rate R, and the vertical axis is exchange rate for the upper panel, and for the lower panel, the vertical axis is monetary supply. Here is monetary supply. And the horizontal axis is domestic interest rate R. Then, since the money supply doesn't change, the money market equilibrium is still 0.1 here, which doesn't change. Then domestic interest rate also does not change R1. But by reflecting the domestic currency sale by central bank, this curve shifts to the right. Then, so because risk premium increases from this to this, then by reflecting this shift, exchange rate depreciates from E1 to E2. So this is the case of sterilized purchase of foreign assets by the central bank. Okay, in summary, with imperfect asset substitutability, sterilized purchases of foreign exchange can cause the home currency to depreciate, and sterilized sales of foreign exchange cause the home currency to appreciate. Okay. Now move on to another topic in the next video.